Today, I'm going to be making a chicken pot pie using Costco Rotisserie Chicken. And if you're new here, this is part of my Costco Chicken Challenge where I'm using rotisserie chicken to make a breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Today, we're on the dinner recipe, so I've already made a breakfast chicken burrito and a chicken salad for lunch. And if you're interested in either of those other two videos, check them out in the description below. But with that, we'll just dive into the chicken pot pie recipe. So with the chicken pot pie recipe, the first step is we're going to be making the crust. And this is one of those things that previously I never made chicken pot pie because I thought the crust was too fiddly. But with this crust that we're using today, it goes by so easy. In the past, I've sometimes would make a crustless chicken pot pie and just had biscuits, which is totally fine too. But I find that I actually really like the crust. And so now that I found a really easy crust recipe that comes together so fast, now I make a lot more chicken pot pie. So the first step is to weigh out the flour, and we need about 354 grams of that. And in order to save measuring utensils, I like to just weigh it using my scale here, but anything is fine. And oops, now I went too much. I got distracted by talking to you guys, so I way overshot it. But one of the things that makes this crust recipe so easy is that you can do it all in the food processor. Okay, now I just gotta focus, make sure I get that 354. Okay, perfect. So after adding my flour, I'm just gonna add a teaspoon and a half of salt. And now that those are in the food processor, I'm gonna go ahead and blend it. I'm just blending it a little bit to make sure that the salt is well mixed with the flour. This is really nothing too extensive here. So now that all of those are together, the next step is to add 12 tablespoons of butter. So you wanna make sure that these are cut up into tablespoon sized chunks. So I'm gonna do that. And the thing about this recipe that I've found is that sometimes people say doing it all in the food processor makes your dough too tough, but I have never found that to be the case. When I've made this in the past, the crust always turns out light and flaky, just as good if you were to do it in a more complicated way. So I'm all about keeping things easy as long as they taste as good. And the thing with this butter is you want to make sure that it is cold. So I took it out of the refrigerator just before I started this recipe. All right, so that's 8 tablespoons. So I'll just need 4 more here. Now that I have my 12 chunks, I'm just gonna pop them in the food processor. And when putting them in the food processor, I'm just gonna try to distribute them evenly as possible, just so they're not all in one big mass when I pop them in here. Okay, and I'm gonna pulse this until we get about pea-sized chunks that form. Okay, so with this pulsing, I do about 1 second pulse, and it does require a little bit of patience because it seems like not anything is happening, but then it will start coming together. So just have to believe and it will work out. I can tell that we're starting to get close though, because I can definitely see that the butter is forming chunks with the flour. So just gonna keep going. Okay, so I think we've reached a good spot with it. Let me see if I can show you guys real quick what it looks like here. You can tell that the flour definitely started incorporating the butter into it because it's starting to get like flaky and getting some of those chunks. And the next step here is adding an egg and some sour cream. And we just need half a cup of the sour cream. Okay. And then I'm just going to process this until a large dough ball begins to form. But you just want to keep an eye on it because you don't want it to go too far past that, just to make sure it doesn't get too tough. All right, so we have one massive dough ball that got so large it touched the ceiling or the top of the Cuisinart. All right, so I think that's all set. So I'm actually just gonna clean this up here real quick, and then I'm gonna transfer this to my mat. The next step is to take the dough out of the food processor, divide it into 2 equal chunks, and then make it into about 2 4-inch discs. So I'm just gonna weigh this dough here real quick to see how much we have, so that will help guide me in terms of what half of it is. Okay, so my dough mass is almost exactly 700 grams, so I'm gonna need about 350 grams per disc. This is why I weigh things, because if you would have asked me, I would have said this is way more dough than this, but they're each about 350 grams. Okay, so now that I have my dough divided, the next step is just to roll it into about a 4-inch disc. And I love this baking mat that I have because it has all the various sizes, and it sticks really well to the counter, so it's perfect. Okay, so that's actually about 5 inches, so that one's all set. And then I'm just gonna do this last one here. And I try not to handle it too much for that butter, but 4 inches, maybe a little bit bigger than that. All right, so I'm just gonna wrap these in plastic, pop them in the refrigerator, and refrigerate them for about an hour. Plastic wrap is my nemesis, but seems like it's always impossible to work with. Okay, so now that our dough is chilling, I'm gonna go ahead and start prepping our vegetables. One really exciting thing is that these are onions from my garden. I've never grown onions before, so I was super excited when these turned out. They were so simple, so easy. I mean, I think I had to start them back in February from seeds, but then, you know, once I transplanted them outside, they basically needed nothing the whole summer. They were just so easy, didn't have any diseases, and look how great. Like, I could buy this in the grocery store, so definitely going to be growing more onions going forward. So one thing with this recipe is you can use a bunch of raw veggies like carrots and celery. In this case, I am just going to make my life a little simpler and use frozen veggies. Honestly, I think you can't tell the difference in the end product, and it just saves a bunch of time. I also, this is my personal opinion, probably others don't feel this way, I am not really a celery fan, so I just avoid putting that in a lot of dishes. The recipe calls for it, you can definitely do that, but that is one I always skip. The other thing that I really like about this chicken pot pie recipe, or just chicken pot pie in general, is that I feel like it's such a warm and hearty dish. It's great for fall and winter, but really good year round. But I like it just because it has that heartiness, but it has so many vegetables in it. It's just packed full of them. So it makes it a really easy way to get all of those in. And the other thing I really like too is that you can kind of customize it to be whatever vegetables you want. So like I said, I don't really like celery, don't have to put it in. If you don't like carrots, don't have to put those in. You can just replace it with, you know, a bunch of other root vegetables that you do like. So it's kind of a nice option of, whew, onions getting to me, nice option of putting in vegetables that you enjoy eating. And maybe it's just a my family kind of thing, but my grandfather loved chicken pot pies. He would always get those Marie Callender ones. And so I just grew up eating a lot of chicken pot pies, and always kind of gives me fond memories of him as well. And honestly, who doesn't love a chicken pot pie? Okay, so now I'm just gonna move on to prepping my potato. You can skin it, honestly, because I cut them up in such small slices. I don't bother doing that, and especially with these Yukon Golds, the skin is so thin, so I feel like it doesn't really bother me. And the other really exciting thing is this potato is also from my garden. This was the first year I grew potatoes as well, so the potatoes were also super easy. Definitely doing those again in future years. And in this chicken pot pie, we will be putting chicken, obviously, but if you don't eat meat, I've also made pot pies that are just essentially like vegetable pot pies that I think are really good, because I feel like really the star of these dishes, the vegetable anyway, and then you get that creaminess and that heartiness, and so you almost don't really need the chicken. So if you want to make it without chicken, you can definitely do that as well. Okay, so then the last thing that I need to prep, since I'm using these frozen vegetables, is just the chicken broth. And I love to use chicken bouillon instead of buying those cartons of chicken broth, because I feel like those cartons, I always use part of them, they sit in my fridge, and then since I don't use all of them, I end up just throwing them away. But with this chicken bouillon, you can just use however much you need, and then it stays good in your fridge for months. So in this case, I need about 2 1/4 cup of water. So for every cup of water, you're supposed to use about a teaspoon of the chicken bouillon. So I always just approximate it. Definitely does not have to be perfect. All right, and then once I just get it in the water, I'm just going to stir it a little bit to resuspend it. All right, and that's pretty good. And so actually, I forgot one thing. I actually need to prep this fresh thyme. So I need, let me see, 1 teaspoon of this. So really not too much. Okay. And my brother recently got these new measuring spoons. And one of the really nice things is they have both a wet and a dry side, or they have the same volume on each end, which is really nice because now that I have this dirty, I can just put my thyme in the other side of the measuring cup. So I just need about a teaspoon of this. And I feel like with pot pies in general, thyme is like the key ingredient. And so a lot of recipes do call for fresh thyme. And this is the sort of one of the few circumstances I really do spring to buy the fresh stuff in the grocery store. Because I feel like it really does make that flavor difference. And it smells so good. And it just, like, the smell of it just reminds me of what a pot pie should taste like. I've never actually grown thyme. I grow a lot of other herbs. So let me know in the comments if thyme is something you've grown, if you find it worth it. Is it easy? I don't know. I haven't really looked too much into it, but something maybe I should consider growing. Okay, so this recipe calls for using butter to soften your vegetables, and I'm just going to follow the recipe, but if you wanted to make this a little healthier, you could definitely just use extra virgin olive oil. Honestly, I've done that in the past, and I feel like I can't really tell the difference. It doesn't like come, I know extra virgin olive oil has like a really strong taste, but I find with all the other things in this recipe that you can't really taste in the end, so. All right, now that it's melted, I'm gonna go ahead and put in my onions. And the other thing to note about this, like if you were using the celery and raw carrots and all that kind of stuff, you'd put those in here as well. Since I'm using the frozen and those cook so fast, I'm gonna wait till the onions are about at the doneness I'm looking for, and then I'm gonna add those, since that will just come together so quickly. The other thing I need to add here is the salt and the pepper. And I'm going to cook these until they start getting soft. And the one, I guess, advantage of doing it with butter is it does smell so good with these onions cooking in the butter, and you can smell a little bit of that pepper as well. Definitely starting to smell good. All right, so my onions have started to soften. I think they're basically exactly the way I want them to be cooked. So now I'm gonna add in my frozen vegetables and really just cook those until they're warm. Next step is to add my flour to this mixture. So we need about 6 tablespoons of that. And this just helps the broth that we're going to put in there thicken. Okay, now I've lost count. I think that's 6. Maybe we'll do a little for good measure. There we go. So we're just going to stir this in and cook it for about 90 seconds or until it's about golden. And again, this just really helps make sure that when we pour the chicken broth and the other liquid in, it'll be a more sort of gravy-like, more viscous, thicker sauce. Okay, now we're pouring in our liquid ingredients slowly. So we're gonna do some of the chicken broth, and I'm just gonna give that a second, kind of let that. And you can see how nice and thick this is when it's coming together here. I'm doing this in a skillet because I already had this pan out and I already used it once today, so I just rinsed it out so I could use it again and get fewer dishes dirty. But if you do want to do it in a saucepan, so something that has a little bit higher edges, you can definitely do that too. And then the other liquid that I have to add is our half and half, or you can also use heavy cream as well. And then we just want to make sure this comes to a boil. So now that this is at a boil, I'm gonna go ahead and add my potatoes and my thyme, and then we're gonna reduce heat and just simmer this until those potatoes are tender, or until the sauce thickens a little bit. Okay, so the sauce has thickened considerably. So now the last step over here is I'm just gonna turn off the heat and we're just going to mix in our chicken. And I think the recipe calls for 3 cups of chicken or so, but I'm just gonna kind of eyeball it. If you like a really chickeny pot pie, you can definitely add the full 3 cups. I don't like too much chicken. I kind of like more vegetables than chicken, but you can kind of do whatever works best for you. Okay, I think that actually looks pretty perfect. So I'm gonna call it there. You definitely could put in way more chicken than this. There's definitely not that much chicken in here, but this is just my personal preference, so. Okay, so my dough has been sitting out of the refrigerator for about 10 minutes to warm it up a little bit, so hopefully it's at a workable consistency. So I'm gonna roll each of these out into 12-inch dough rounds. The nice thing about this mat, it makes it just so easy to know exactly when you have the right diameter. And if at any point when you're doing this, if the dough feels too warm, you can put it back in the refrigerator. And I think this is like the easiest pie dough I've ever done. So I think we got it to 12 inches. And so now I'm just gonna gently put it over my rolling pin. Gently, if I can do that. Okay, I think it might actually be easier just to go for it. Go for it. Ooh. My second pie dough, this one also needs to be 12 inches, but with this one, and I'm gonna put it on a parchment lined baking sheet when I'm done, and then put it in the refrigerator. Okay, I got it rolled out to 12 inches. This one got a little sticky, so it probably got a little bit too warm, but I just decided to go for it. I put some flour on it. I'm gonna very carefully pull it off here, hope it doesn't break. Okay. And so I'm just gonna let those chill in the refrigerator for the next 30 minutes. And then after that's done, we'll start assembling the pie. I just pulled the pie dough out of the refrigerator. It's been in there for 30 minutes. So now really we're in the home stretch of this recipe. I'm just going to add our filling from earlier into the pie dough. As you can see, this is a very thick and hearty chicken pot pie. Okay, I'm just gonna push it down to evenly spread it around here. I'm just gonna pop this on the top. And in the past, like if you actually add the 3 cups of chicken, it will be a little bit more domed of a pie, but since I went a little shy on the chicken, it's more of a flat pie crust. So now I'm just gonna go ahead and kind of like crimp this around the edge here, just to make sure it's nice and sealed. You could make it look really fancy and do some nice crimping. I am not that talented. So I'm just gonna like gently push it down. And then the next step is I do just wanna trim the edges for any of this excess dough. And the next step is we're just gonna cut 4 2-inch slits. Okay, and then I'm gonna give it a little bit of an egg wash here. And this will just help make it a nice, really golden brown color on the top. I got my egg wash on, so now I'm gonna pop this in the oven at 450 degrees, cook that for about 19 minutes or until it starts looking golden brown, and then reduce the temperature to 375, cook it for some additional time, about, I think, let's see, 13-ish minutes until it gets like a nice golden brown. And then I'll see you back here for the taste test. All right, so I pulled this out of the oven about 45 minutes ago, and I was just letting it cool a little bit before I dig into it. But you can see that the egg wash made it look like such a nice golden brown crust. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut a piece and give it a try. Okay, now the moment of truth. I feel like this is the hardest part, is getting the first piece out. I'm gonna do my best here to try to keep it intact. Oh, definitely not perfect, but I think good enough to give it a try. That is so creamy, so rich. You can definitely taste the thyme and the pepper coming through. I didn't get any crust in that one, so let me just try one more bite here. Make sure I get some of the crust. And the crust is so good. It's so buttery, it's so flaky, still moist. I feel like all those other fiddly crust recipes, they turn out great, but this one was so much easier and turns out just as good. I would highly recommend this. Super delicious. Okay, I'm just gonna taste one more bite here. That's super good. Well, that brings us to the end of our rotisserie roundup series. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have anything that you would like me to make next, please drop it in the comments. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you in the next one.